Hi and welcome. So I want to spend the next 5 or 10 minutes just reading 2 or 3 more paragraphs of an essay on Mr. Norman Finkelstein, and then afterwards I'm going to pose a question to which I really would love to hear answers, or perhaps more questions, and we'll start a larger discussion on that. But for now, let's continue with the reading. All right, so we were in the middle of talking about Egypt and the wall that the Egyptians are putting up, and then I said, so I'll take it back just 1 or 2 sentences. So as far as the Egyptians or the Lebanese or other Arab countries in the region are concerned, they're really no different from the United States. They'll just throw lots of money at a problem, but they don't really do much in the sense of actually helping get people rehoused and that sort of thing. So anyways, there's no denying that Israeli forces share in the responsibility for according to the Gaza Health Ministry, the estimated 32 or 33,000 Gazan deaths since the start of the war about 6 months ago. However, if Israelis were really being indiscriminate and committing a quote unquote genocide, I'm pretty sure there would have been far more deaths. Additionally, to respond in what you'd call a proportionate manner would mean Israelis would have to kill about 1,200 Palestinians per day since the start of the war, and that's 6 months. So, the reader or the viewer can do the math. It's just multiplication. You take 1,200, you multiply by about 180. Putting the cynicism aside, it's more important to note that the number of civilian deaths in Gaza comes from, of course, as I said, the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. They do not exactly have, let's say, a reputation for telling the truth. In fact, their reputation is more for inflating the numbers, which is not to say they are reporting lies, but it is to say whether or not it's 32,000 is definitely at best questionable. Now, of course, one could accuse the Israeli media of the same exact thing, right? You'd be correct to make such an accusation. However, to me, it's like comparing the outcome of throwing a rock versus throwing a cinder block at a mirror. So here's one serious question, and this is the one that I want to further discuss. Here's a serious question I haven't heard a serious answer to yet, so I'm curious. What would have happened had the Israelis not responded after the October 7th attack? So I'm posing that, and so my response. What would have happened is, well, you don't really have to think much, and I'll tell you why. Hamas would just at least attempt to repeat another massacre, and they would attempt to do so multiple times. They've stated as much, if not more, on public TV. Now, they would do this with the at least intention of trying to wipe out 9 million Israelis altogether. Remember, about 2 million of whom are not Jews. They are, in fact, Arab Israelis in Israel. Now, okay, so that sounds like a lot of time, energy, and money spent on destruction rather than construction. If the Palestinians or Hamas had really wanted their own state, well, why did their leaders use billions of dollars to build terror tunnels? And then instead not use that money to actually take care of the above ground Gaza? People will respond with some robotic answer of, quote, well, they had no choice when Israel is keeping them locked in an open air prison with no jobs. What were they supposed to do? Unquote. Take Gaza's economy as one example. you realize many Gazans living below the poverty line has very little to do with Israel. This is actually by design, and I'll explain. So Gaza has had leaders over the last 18 years who care much more about enriching themselves and living far away in Qatar than they do about helping their own people. This is just blatantly obvious. In fact, they believe that helping their own people is the job of the United Nations and have stated so on television. If Norman Finkelstein really cared about Palestinian freedom, Palestinian statehood, then he would want to eradicate Hamas altogether, which is exactly what the Israeli forces are doing. There are many Gazans who hate Hamas, and they curse Hamas, but they risk being silenced or killed if they so much as speak out in public. This is precisely why no one hears about these people. Like Gaza's poverty rate, their voices being silenced is by design. Now, when Hamas finally surrenders and no longer poses a legitimate threat to anyone in the region, the Israeli Defense Forces will once again be the true heroes in this story. If the IDF can liberate 2.1 million Gazans from Hamas extremism, then I say the more power to them. In the meantime, people like Finkelstein, the sheep herder, as I'd like to call him, will continue to round up these silly minds, these young liberal sheep who, in America and elsewhere, are just invested in condemning the quote-unquote Israeli genocide. And they chant Free Palestine, and they chant ceasefire, completely blind to the fact that Israelis are currently working to make Palestine free from Hamas. In summation, Norman Finkelstein has done a grave disservice to the Jewish people and to the civilized world. No one has to hold him accountable for his despicable actions at this point. My essay is just a way to hopefully give you a glimpse into this sick individual's mind. And so, sure, fine, hold him accountable or don't hold him accountable. He's gonna just ultimately suffer a much more painful fate because he will continue to live a very lonely life and essentially leave behind a legacy of lunacy when he finally dies. He's a grotesque stain on a free society, the free society from which he benefits, to use a platform in order to spread his bigotry. One day, I hope those who do quote Norm will denounce his name upon realizing just how mentally ill and unqualified this man is to speak on matters pertaining to Palestine. So thanks for listening. Again, I welcome comments. Curious, I really want to engage in this discussion in a thoughtful manner. So we'll continue. And that is the question I wanted to kind of leave with, which is what would have happened, or how could things have played out differently, whether good or bad, for both Palestinians and Israelis, if after the October 7th attack, the Israelis decided not to go in, not to invade, not to do any sort of bombing campaign on Gaza, and just said, okay, we're not doing anything. Maybe except for putting more security measures in place on the Israeli side. But as far as a ground invasion and the last 6 months of warfare and 32,000 people dead, pretend it didn't happen. What would things look like? Anyhow, thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.